Bret, let's just get to the point, okay? I'm not finished, but let me just finish. But you have to let me finish. Bret, let's just get to the point, okay? I told you. Let's all be honest about that.
Do you regret the decision?
No,
Do you owe
Bret,
those families an apology?
This interview is interesting for two main reasons. One, because it shows the tactics politicians use when they ask questions they don't want to answer. And two, because it shows how skilled interviewers react to such tactics. This influences how the audience perceives the given politician, and it determines how informative the interview is. On this channel, I analyze the language of influential people. If you're excited about how language works, like and subscribe for more videos. Welcome aboard.
Madam Vice President, thank you for the time.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Bret.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
In political interviews, this type of question is called a fork, and it's not because Baier and Harris are about to have dinner together. A fork is when all conceivable answers to a question are equally bad. If Harris says none, she's not telling the truth. If she says she doesn't want to answer, she comes across as deceptive. And if she makes an estimate, she comes across as incompetent. When faced with an inconvenient question, a politician will often use roundabout answers. Answers that give the impression that the politician will get to the answer eventually. In reality, however, politicians often use roundabout answers to obfuscate and dodge questions. And that's exactly what Harris does next.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration.
She doesn't look so glad he raised the issue, though, which appears to be exactly why she says she's glad. Harris's way of phrasing this is worth noting. She says the issue of immigration, already generalizing Baier's specific question for self-benefit, because by generalizing the issue, she can go into speech mode and speak in general and preferably vague terms, which, unfortunately, is one of the most important pillars of political communication.
Because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have.
But that's not what Baier said. Baier asked a specific question about an estimate. He didn't talk about immigration in general, as Harris has an interest in making this discussion about. Self-repairs often occur when speakers are looking for a way to deflect or postpone the answer.
You know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah.
With "you know," Harris appeals to alleged shared knowledge between her and Baier, even though Baier doesn't know. That's why he's asking. This appeal shows just how self-aware Harris is.
I think it's 1 million, 3 million.
Bret, let's just get to the point, okay? The point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have
it's a
an
rough
immigration
estimate of
system
6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And
what Harris misses here is that for once, she wasn't asked a question that allowed her to make a speech. Thus, given the context, rather than beginning to answer, it sounds a lot more like she was beginning to deflect by introducing a focus shift.
Bret, let's just get to the point.
Actually, Baier had made a point.
how many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
So it's Harris who needs to be on point.
Let's just get to the point.
This phrase is in the same category as "let's be clear, let me be clear," a sure sign that the speaker is about to obfuscate, while feigning honesty, assertiveness, and specificity.
And let me be clear. It needs to be very clear.
We have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
Once again, this is a generic statement, unspecific to the estimate Baier asked for, and most likely knew he wasn't going to get a direct answer to.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
With this, Baier has abandoned his original question about the estimate. The new question, however, still functions as a fork, because both options are undesirable. If Harris says yes, the unlikely answer, she admits to her wrongdoing, and politicians never do that. If she says no, it would sound like she's making light of the heinous crimes Baier makes sure to mention in his attempt to appeal to viewers' emotions, anger, sadness, and indignation. This 35-second long question is a so-called complex preface. The purpose of such prefaces is to problematize the politician's past statements or actions and make it difficult for the politician to answer. Next, Harris's stalling should be noted. Notice her repetitions and the acts and policies she mentions, even though these acts and policies have nothing to do with Baier's question and the topic at hand.
Go at the beginning of your administration.
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the Chips and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
I'm
and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising,
okay,
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
A political interview shouldn't only be about getting information, but also about asking the politician to account for her words and actions. In that sense, Baier takes his role seriously, because he interrupts Harris when he hears her using the stating the obvious evasion and/or stalling technique, and he underlines his ethos by quickly identifying the act that Harris took over 30 seconds to get to.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
Harris's evasion/stalling technique becomes even clearer when it's contrasted to easy and intellectually insulting questions that she's suddenly able to answer immediately. How strange.
When he called you and said he was pulling out of the race, what was that like? And did he offer to endorse you right away, or did you ask for it?
It was a Sunday, so my family was staying with us. We were sitting down to do a puzzle. The first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath.
Yes, she mentioned that 10 seconds ago.
Within practically hours of taking the oath. The first bill.
So whenever Harris prioritizes stalling over answering directly, viewers can be sure that she finds the question sensitive.
May I please finish?
Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish.
Actually, Baier doesn't have to let Harris finish. It depends on what she was about to finish. And since Baier's already identified the act Harris uses for diversion, there's nothing to finish. Outrage, or fake outrage, is a diversion and evasion tactic in itself. Politicians use it to make themselves look like victims of unfair interviewers, even though nothing could be further from the truth.
And I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
Unfortunately, this tactic often works, and it works for Harris, because next she's allowed to hold the conversational floor for 2 minutes of diversion.
And I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem. And from day one, then, we have done a number of things, including to address our asylum system and put more resources, getting more judges.
With her facial expressions, intonation, and slow speech, Harris makes it sound and look like she's being patient with Baier, as if he's the one who doesn't understand, and as if she has the upper hand, even though she's merely mentioning what they've supposedly done, a far cry from the original question. No matter how many times Harris likes to say day one to enhance or feign ethos.
From day one. And from day one.
At this point, most viewers have likely forgotten the original question, which is the point of roundabout answers that actually function as evasion and thus diversion.
Looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
So, ironically, the fact that Harris does everything she can to talk around it could actually be seen as a compromising yes to Baier's original question. This point's underlined by Harris's subsequent attack on her political opponent, a tactic politicians often use when they feel cornered.
That's the work we did, and we worked on supporting what was a bipartisan effort, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Congress, to actually strengthen the border. That border bill would have put 1,500 more border agents at the border. It would have allowed us to put more resources into prosecuting transnational criminal organizations, which I have done as the Attorney General, former Attorney General of a border state.
Madam Vice President, a couple of things.
Prosecuted trafficking of drugs, guns, and human beings. And Donald Trump, but let me just finish.
Six Democrats voted against that bill.
Learned about that bill and told them to kill it because he preferred to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. But let me just finish.
Even after nearly 2 minutes of diversion, Harris still orders Baier to let her finish. And what is it that she's finishing? A scenario, what this bill would have meant hypothetically. So even as a diversion tactic, this isn't a proper answer because she doesn't mention actual results.
Prosecuting transnational criminal organizations, which I have done.
To Harris, it's all about getting to the script, the lines she's rehearsed. One of them being her background as a prosecutor. In her interview with Oprah, she got away with this unreliable job description.
I have spent the majority of my career being concerned about the well-being of other people.
Yeah.
As I've said, in my career as a prosecutor, I never looked at a victim or a witness and asked them, are you a Republican or a Democrat? The only thing I ever asked them is, are you okay?
Are you okay? I know when I heard that.
You know?
Touch me.
As a prosecutor, your main concern isn't that people are okay. You're primarily concerned with winning cases, and you're certainly not concerned with the well-being of the people you're prosecuting. This is a calculating oversimplification on Harris's part to make her seem compassionate and caring. By the way, waste collectors also don't ask people if they're Republican or Democrat before collecting and disposing of their waste. Does Oprah also find that touching? Or is it only when she advertises for Harris? That's rhetorical.
Because he preferred to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem.
But wait, I thought Harris was all about lifting people up.
Where there is some suggestion that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down, instead of where I believe most Americans are, which is to believe that the true measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up. The idea that some would suggest and that my opponent and it suggests, which is that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down. Come on. The real measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up.
Seems like that was yet another empty platitude from the script. Who would have thought?
Because he preferred to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And in this election, this is rightly a discussion that the American people want to have. And what they want are solutions, and they want a president of the United States who's not playing political games with the issue,
I hear you.
But actually is focused on fixing it.
Six Democrats.
Harris speaks on people's behalf, guiding them what to think, so that it doesn't look like she's alone in thinking and saying this. Also, these are generic and vague statements from Harris's script, because what playing political games and fixing means is subjective, completely dependent on the eye of the beholder. It's a bit ironic that the phrase playing political games is on Harris's mind, because the evasion techniques she's been using could be seen as playing games. Harris has just spent 2 minutes on what Baier only needs 8 seconds to negate, which shows that he's prepared for Harris's stalling tactic. Let's watch.
I hear you.
But actually is focused on fixing it.
6 Democrats voted against that bill. It would have allowed 1.8 million illegal immigrants into the country a year. A lot of conservatives had a problem with it. These are the 6 Democrats. But more importantly, back to the original premise, Jocelyn Nungary Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, they are young women who were killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill. Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Bret,
those families an apology?
What makes this question preface uncomfortable isn't only the so-called synecdoche Baier mentions. A synecdoche is a small part of a problem that's used to represent the whole, how these three women's cases supposedly point to a general problem. What makes this preface particularly uncomfortable is the fact that Baier ends up in a different place than Harris could have hoped for, because by asking if Harris would like to apologize, Baier is already presupposing that what Harris has done calls for an apology. So if Harris were to say yes, she'd be admitting to a wrongdoing, and a politician would never do that unless faced with an ultimatum. And if she says no, she'll look insensitive. So once again, this is a fork, as both options are undesirable. As a journalist, Baier very well knows that Harris will dodge his question. That's once again designed to appeal to people's emotion and pity, and portray Harris as an antagonist. Before hearing Harris's answer, it's worth mentioning that apology questions are becoming increasingly popular. Apology questions and subsequent diversion tactics.
She's about to lose her winter fuel allowance. She voted for you, but she feels let down. Would you like to take this opportunity to say sorry to pensioners like Chrissy?
Well, I am really concerned that we've been put in this position.
Would you like to say sorry?
The people who should be saying sorry are the last government.
And that people will notice you have not said sorry.
Do you owe
Bret,
those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Madam Vice President.
To ensure that no future harm would occur. And this election in 20 days will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, even if it is not to their political advantage in an election, because there was a solution, Bret.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Harris cleverly avoids using the conjunction but.
That is true. It is also true.
This is a clever move, as this conjunction is used to negate or minimize that which preceded it. In this case, how tragic these cases are. This way, Harris emphasizes both viewpoints equally. However, it's not good that she keeps talking about hypotheticals when Baier is asking about what the Biden administration did more than 9 months ago. This is Harris repeatedly trying to make a focus shift, and then Harris resorts to her script.
Will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, and they want a president of the United States who's not playing political games with the issue,
I hear you.
But actually is focused on fixing it.
6 Democrats.
Which shows just how sensitive Baier's question is.
Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungare's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I am so sorry for her loss. Sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions.
With this, we're able to deduce that when Harris attacks her opponent rhetorically, it's because she feels cornered. This is a pattern in this interview, and the reason why it's consistent is because it's part of her media training. This time, however, she uses the conjunction but to create a contrast, which has the unfortunate side effect of minimizing that which preceded it, in this case being so sorry for her loss, as Harris self-servingly phrases it, because being sorry for her loss isn't the same as being sorry for what she's done politically, which is what Baier wanted to apologize for. However, to the untrained ear, since she's reusing Baier's terminology, it could sound like she's being properly responsive to the question, which she isn't.
I will tell you that
this is restrictive language. Restrictive language indicates that there's information that the speaker discloses and, interestingly, doesn't disclose. This shows that Harris is highly self-aware of what she says, and more importantly, what she doesn't say. That's because politicians are taught to put their image above all else. Thus, everything they say has a self-serving purpose. Next, another power struggle.
With an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well.
But do you want to answer
in all fairness, I told you, I feel awful for what she and her family have experienced.
With her words and intonation, Harris deceptively makes it sound like this was what Baier's question was about, as if it's strange that she has to keep saying it. Once again, this is outrage, a fake outrage as diversion, because feeling awful for what this family has experienced has nothing to do with apologizing for a policy.
During that time, you said repeatedly that the border was secure. When in your mind did it start becoming a crisis?
This is a very plain question. Harris's reaction, however, unintentionally lets the viewers know that she finds it compromising. Let's watch.
When in your mind did it start becoming a crisis?
I think we've had a broken immigration system transcending, by the way, Donald Trump's administration even before. Let's all be honest about that. I have no pride in saying that this is a perfect immigration system. I've been clear, I think we all are, that it needs to be fixed. Let's all be honest about that.
Yes, because honesty, as in answering questions directly, has certainly been important to Harris during this interview. In conversation, speakers expect each other to be honest. Thus, many speakers don't even think about appealing to honesty. Many times, and especially in a high-pressure situation like this, when speakers appeal to honesty, they don't only do it to portray themselves as honest, but also because they're not being entirely honest. The reason why the latter also seems to be the case here is because Harris uses another diversion tactic, which I call false standard.
I have no pride in saying that this is a perfect immigration system. I've been clear, I think we all are.
It's a false standard because no system will ever be perfect, and no one's talking about perfect systems. However, by making perfect the standard, Harris and other politicians grant themselves leeway. It's a way of not being held responsible or solely responsible, and it's another diversion tactic.
I think we all are.
Harris is quick to associate with other people so that she's not alone in thinking and saying this, presumably.
Let's all
in all, saying this honestly doesn't seem to be as easy and obvious as Harris uses intonation to try and make it seem. I hope you found it exciting. See you next time.